Madam Chair, you have a live mic.
Thank you. I'd like to call the Big Cypress Basin Board meeting for August 23rd, 2024 to order. I'd like to check with our board members who are attending virtually to make sure that they are connected. We'll start with Vice Chair Waters. Vice Chair Waters. Okay, thank you. Ms. McLeod.
I'm here.
Ms. Smith.
I'm here.
Mr. Romano.
I'm here.
Great. Thank you so much for participating. We'll now move to the Pledge of Allegiance. If you'll all stand and join me. I pledge allegiance
Just to the flag of the United States of America, stand one nation under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Good morning, board members and staff and members of the public who are joining here today. For those who are who are members of the public, if you would like to speak, we have two opportunities for public comment, both at the beginning of the meeting and at the end of the meeting. If you are here in person, please fill out a speaker card that is available in the hallway and provide it to Troy here sitting to my right. And if you're attending virtually, please raise your hand if you are on Zoom, or if you're using your phone, *9 raises your hand and *6 mutes and unmutes you. As a reminder, today's proceedings are accessible via Zoom, as well as Collier TV and also the district's website. Agenda revisions. Lisa Keeler, do we have any agenda revisions?
No, Madam Chair, there are no revisions.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item abstention by board members. I'll start with board members in the chambers. Mr. Hill?
I have none.
Vice Chair Waters?
None for me, ma'am.
Ms. McLeod?
None for me.
Ms. Smith?
None for me.
Mr. Romano?
None for me.
And I do not have any. Okay, we'll consider the approval of the minutes of July 8th. If there are no changes or corrections to the minutes, I'll entertain a motion in a second to approve the July 8th, 2024 meeting minutes. Do I have a motion?
Motion moved.
Okay, Mr. Hill moves to approve the minutes. Do I have a second, please?
Second that.
Okay, second by Ms. Smith. We'll now go and call the vote. Vice Chair Waters?
Yes.
Mr. Hill?
Yes.
Ms. McLeod?
Yes.
Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Romano?
Yes.
And I vote yes, that vote is unanimous. That brings us to the Basin Administrator's Report. Lisa Keeler.
Good morning, Madam Chair and board members. Today, I want to take a few minutes and just talk about Tropical Storm Debbie and more the human side. I don't want to worry Andrew or Brad that I'm going to steal their thunder because I know they're going to talk about it today. But I really want to just talk about what a great job everybody did and also just highlight how difficult storms are because for probably almost 100% of everybody else, the storm it was rainy on Saturday night, rainy all day Sunday and Monday. It was a pretty nice day. Everybody was back to work and it was fine. But for us at the district, Tropical Storm Debbie started more than a week beforehand. Started actually maybe the last weekend of July. Our district meteorologists were already watching the storm and keeping an eye on what was happening in their predictions and communicating that to our water managers. So a week before, more than a week before the storm, our water managers were already making adjustments to our system so that we could prepare for the predicted rainfall that we might be getting through Tropical Storm Debbie. So also in that week before Tropical Storm Debbie, Andrew and his team were out making their adjustments to the system. Everybody's doing their part. we were coordinating with Collier County. The week before Debbie, we started having morning phone calls with the county stormwater team, with Marshall Miller and Gio Gonzalez. Every morning, 8 o'clock, meeting with the county to talk about what was happening, who was doing what, any obstacles that we were seeing in preparing for that storm. We also participated in the county's EOC calls and coordinated with them. And even a couple of early morning phone calls with Dan Summer early. Sorry, Dan, if we woke you up. It takes a lot. And that's my point, is this isn't, folks will say, oh, it's just a little bit of rain. But when you're providing flood control, it's a lot of coordination, and our team does an amazing job at it. It's stressful for the team. They work long hours. They maybe lose sleep while they're thinking about the system and what to do, what needs to come next. You lose time with your family, and on occasion you forget to eat. And so you miss a few meals too. It's a lot, but the team does an amazing job. And they are to be commended for it. You're going to hear them talk about the things that they did, but for everybody else, we get to move on with our daily lives. But for us, it's a 2-week adventure out of our regular work. And so just wanted to commend the team for a wonderful job that they did with Tropical Storm Debbie. And if you have any questions about it, I'll take those.
Are there any questions for Lisa from the board?
Well, Lisa, just explain, like, what did you have your hands on? This storm obviously didn't really amount to significant issues compared to some like of our hurricanes. But what key items are you looking at as far as your management of the system?
Sure. So we have to draw the system down to make room for that rainfall. It's not just the rainfall, but it's everybody else that's draining into it. All the development's lakes have to have room to accept that rainfall. So we're handling the entire county's flood control, basically. So we have to make those adjustments. We also have to look at the tides, when those tides are expected, because as you know, this is a gravity system. It's really hard to make releases. And when I say really hard, I really mean impossible to make releases when you are looking at 3 feet on top of regular high tide. So when you've got a 6-foot downstream height of your water, it makes it very hard for us to move water and provide that flood protection. And as typical with storms is you will get your most amount of rainfall coinciding with your high tide. So there are areas in town that are low-lying area, and there were streets that were flooded. There were streets that were closed during this time. We heard that there were a few homes that had water in their garages, over their pool decks. So while folks will say, it's a tropical storm, you're not looking at wind impacts that you get from a hurricane, but there is certainly some severe and serious flooding concerns that we're preparing for and handling through onslaught and in the week following in recovery.
And I'd like to echo your comments, Lisa, regarding the great work that the team did during that whole process of preparing for the storm, during the storm, and then post-storm. And I'd like to give a special thank you to the Miami Field Station for their assistance with the pumps that they sent over to the Basin for us to be able to draw down the system much quicker than we would have been able to. So thanks to everyone for working together.
Very good.
Anything else for Lisa? Okay, I don't see any hands raised, Lisa, so we'll move on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to general public comment. Our first of 2 opportunities during the meeting to address the board. Troy, do we have any public comment?
I have one hand raised on Zoom. Mike Efferbein. I hope I'm saying that close to correct.
Elfenbein.
Elfenbein. You're being prompted to unmute yourself, Mike, if you'll do that at this time.
Ta-da.
There you are, Mike.
Yeah, I'll take it. I've been called worse, so I'll take that. Thank you. Mike Elfenbein, Cypress chapter of the Isaac Walton League. And I do want to echo the sentiments that Charlotte's expressing of the great work that you guys are doing at the Big Cypress Basin. Lisa does an amazing job. Her leadership skills are second to none, and everybody in the region really appreciates that. I did have a couple of things. I did some read ahead on the agenda last night, and there was a couple things that came to mind. First and foremost was the recent announcement from Bob Burns, Naples Airport Authority, who has recommended that the Naples Airport be relocated to Picayune Strand State Forest. I didn't know if that was something you all were going to cover today or was on your radar, but it's very disconcerting to a lot of people in Southwest Florida, and I would hope that you guys might address that. I had some other comments regarding the agenda items, specifically Lake Trafford. I just had some questions about, and maybe Beecham could provide that in his presentation. I'm sure he will. How much material was in an acre that was 37,500 an acre to harvest? But maybe I'll save some of those questions for afterwards. And then I had some questions about Picayune Strand. I looked at the slides. There was some comments about restored and enhanced habitat for fish and wildlife, including the Florida panther. However, with current and previous projects to rehydrate the landscape throughout South Florida, a lot of those projects have led to the exclusion of panthers from those places, quite the opposite of what we're calling for. Most of that's been a displacement due to additional water levels, like in Water Conservation Area 3, parts of Big Cypress National Preserve and Everglades National Park. And those are some of the concerns with Western Everglades. We were able to see a panther this week in a place that was going to become an STA. Thankfully, we averted that disaster. But I think a lot of people have a lot of concerns that additional water might not be so good for panthers and other terrestrial species. I look forward to the rest of the meeting. Thank you all for your hard work. Charlotte, PJ, thank you guys. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Mike, for your comments.
That is the only hand we had raised and no one here in person.
Okay, thank you so much, Troy. That brings us to our first discussion item, which is Lake Trafford Aquatic Enhancement, past and future. And we're happy to have Beecham First here with us today. He's the biological administrator for the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. Thank you, Beecham, for being here with us.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've been doing on Lake Trafford for really the past 15 or so years. We were involved, not me personally, but FWC has been involved in the lake for 25, 30 years, going back into the 90s. We were part of the initial push to get something done. You know, obviously a lot of that came from the city, the county, the district, the Corps, stakeholder groups. But we're going to talk a little bit about what has happened in the past and what we have planned for the future, or hope to have planned for the future. For those who don't know, Lake Trafford used to be a really nice lake going back pre-60s, a macrophyte or aquatic plant dominated system. Water wasn't clear, but it wasn't as cloudy, as turbid as it is right now. But then in the late 60s, hydrilla was introduced into the lake. We went through about 30 years, almost 30 years of battling hydrilla. And at the time, battling hydrilla meant herbicide. So every time that hydrilla topped out on the lake, herbicide treatment. We've done 2 stocking of grass carp in the lake. But as much as hydrilla was an issue, it was the development of the system. A lot of people don't realize this, but the watershed for Lake Trafford is essentially the city of Immokalee. But when I first came onto the lake, you know, I thought, oh, the water's coming from the north, the water's coming from the west. No, the watershed for Lake Trafford is the city of Immokalee. So water that's coming into the lake, that is affecting the lake, is coming from the city, from development around the city, from agriculture around the city. But the problems we had was we've had elevated nutrient levels, both phosphorus and nitrogen. We've had low DO problems. We've had high turbidity problems, sediment accumulation, and those led to fish kills, just led to, poor conditions on the lake. Well, finally, the district was able to get on the lake with a dredge. FWC provided a little bit of money. Other entities provided a little bit of money, but between 2006 and 2010, we being everybody, as a collective effort, but it's really the district, got 6 million yards of material out of the lake. Much of that material was taken from the middle of the lake on the first dredging. The second dredging effort, lake just got too low and they had to remove the equipment. And then they did a third treatment in 09-10 and got the material, more material out of the lake. But just to put that 6 million yards into context, if we had to use trucks to move this material, it was taken with a dredge. It was pumped up to a confined disposal facility 2 miles from the lake. It would have taken 300,000 trucks. 300,000 trucks. A truckload is about 20 yards. You line them up bumper to bumper, it would have stretched almost 1,400 miles from Immokalee to Minneapolis, Minnesota. That is just incredible. When you talk about millions of yards, you're like, oh, that's a lot. But putting into concept, 1,400 miles bumper to bumper. They're just incredible to me. Through the 2010s and culminated in 2018, we finally got a formalized management plan for the lake. And what I'm going to talk about today is restoration enhancement of aquatic habitat, what FWC does, what our aquatic habitat restoration enhancement section does. And there's 3 primary goals, actions that are addressed in the management plan. One is windbreaks, living shoreline. One is developing aquatic habitat in the lake, and the other is managing sediments. After the dredging project was done, as the dredging project was being completed, we developed a map based on water levels, bottom sediment, and topography of the lake, and came up with this map. And basically, much of the lake is not really enhanceable. It's just too deep for us to be able to grow aquatic plants in. But what we felt like in the purple area, we felt like we could maybe get submerged plants, eelgrass primarily, maybe pondweed. In the yellow part, and you see how narrow that yellow part is, we thought we could get emergent plants like aquatic grasses, bulrush, different types of emergent plants, and possibly immersed plants like spatterdock and American lotus. And then the dark green parts, those are the marsh. That's above 19 feet bottom elevation. And we felt that those are the areas that we can do maybe some herbicide management, knocking back aquatic plants like cattail and fireflag that can create a lot of the tridal material on the bottom. And some of our first efforts in planting were on these red sites, and it was primarily aquatic grasses and bulrush. Creating windbreaks is exactly what it sounds like. It's creating lines, parallel lines along the shoreline, trying to create dense enough vegetation where we can get other vegetation growing, other desirable vegetation growing behind it, or preferably submerged plants. And this is an example of where we planted some bulrush in a long line. We've had really good success planting bulrush. The problem, and I'll get to this later on, the problem we have is that it's such a narrow band that we're able to plant in. We can only get maybe a couple hundred feet from the marsh and get the plants to grow. We've tried to plant deeper, but it's hard. The lake fluctuates so much. Here's an example of where bulrush is serving as a wave break. We have eelgrass growing behind it. The caveat to this is at lower water levels. We can get eelgrass to grow at these lower water levels below 18 feet, below 17 feet. But again, I'm going to talk about it in a minute, but the lake fluctuates so much. It's such a flashy lake that it's hard to get plants to grow and stay in the lake. One of the very first things we did was we went in with herbicide, and herbicide is always controversial. We even had DEP saying, "Oh, do you really want to use herbicide in the lake? You know, won't we have issues?" And we had comments from the marina owner also about you want to be killing plants in the lake, but once we explain, we're not killing acres and acres of cattail and fireflag, because those are the two species we were targeting. We are cutting what sounds ironic. We're cutting flowways back into the marsh. We didn't want to create a long scope of dead plants, because the sediments that are still in the lake are largely back in the marsh. But we wanted to create a 50 to 100 foot flowway. We would go in and we would then plant plants in those little flowways. You can see the first image is some cattail. Second image is where the cattail was treated. Third image is the open area. And then you can see in the fourth image, we have aquatic grass. Is a plant called Paspaldium. A lot of people know it as Kissimmee grass. But we've had really good success in these shallow water areas by replacing the cattail and fireflag with these more desirable plants that put down less leaf litter. Here's an example of early planting of Kissimmee grass. This is on the northwest corner of the lake. This is literally 6 months of growth. We got these plants out of Lake Rosalie in Polk County, put in 25,000 plants, not in this one area, but this is an example. 6 months later, we went from that image on the left to the image on the right. The lake grows plants. It's not an issue of the plants not being able to grow. Very fertile lake. It's a hydrotrophic lake. It's keeping those plants growing, keeping those plants living in the lake that we're really struggling with. That's one reason that we went to Spatterdock. We went to an immersed plant, a plant that we can plant in deeper water. We can plant in maybe some muckier conditions. And this is especially true on that eastern shoreline in front of Trafford Slough. Water is fairly deep there, even under normal water levels, 4 or 5 feet deep. It's a very mucky bottom. There's lots of nutrients coming out of Trafford Slough for reasons that I'll go into. But we felt that if we could get plants growing there, maybe we can at least create some habitat, maybe create some flow through, in-lake flow through marsh. The issue with that is to be able to plant Spatterdock, you have to use something to keep them on the bottom. And in this case, it's literally cinder blocks. We had to get cinder blocks permitted to drop to the bottom of the lake. And when you're talking about thousands of plants, you're also talking about thousands of cinder blocks. So we're seeing if we can be successful initially and then maybe come back and try it in a larger area. We have had some success with Spatterdock. This is an area just south of Trafford Slough. But one plant that we're really looking towards is American lotus. We're having trouble finding somebody that will plant it. We're having trouble finding somebody that can tell us how to plant it. But this is this photo is a photo from the 90s, from the 80s, from the 70s. American lotus grew in the lake. It proliferated in the lake. It is tolerant of turbid conditions. It's tolerant of mucky conditions because its leaf matter is on the surface. And as long as we can get it to grow tall enough to stay on the surface, we feel we can have a good effect. Which brings us to eelgrass. Eelgrass is a plant everybody wants us to grow. Everybody wants eelgrass to grow in the lake. We've done several planting efforts in the lake. We've used small cages, about 1 meter in diameter, to put around the eelgrass. We put small fences up and planted eelgrass. In all revegetation efforts, the lake has to be below about 18 feet because that's when the water levels are less than 3 feet where we can plant. And just for the height of a normal person, you don't want to be sticking your face in the water if you can help it in Lake Trafford, to be honest. So, we plant when the lake is below 18 feet or lower. We have good success if we can keep the lake low enough for long enough. In fact, if you go back to look at water levels, immediately following the dredging project, the lake got down as low as about 17 feet in 2013. It got down to 15.29 feet during the dredging project in 2008. And that's the reason the dredge was taken off. Unfortunately, that 15 feet where we would have gotten a good response from SAV, within 2 months, the lake rose 6 feet and went from 15 feet to 21.5 feet. And that's a problem that we face on the lake, is that lake is just super flashy and gets high. It seems like every single year. But we've had good initial success planting eelgrass. Here's a photo from 2022 where we did some planting efforts. Unfortunately, water depth, as I've alluded to several times, and water clarity are the issues that we're dealing with trying to get any type of submerged plant to grow. You can see in this, the image on the right is when the lake is right at the edge of the marsh. The water levels are right at the edge of the marsh, and middle of the lake is 8 feet. Right along the shoreline is 2 to 3 feet. In fact, that southwest corner, there's a little sandbar not really little, but a sandbar comes out from that southwest corner, and we've tried to plant that before, but you can see at 18 feet, 19 feet, it goes up to 21 feet. All of a sudden, we're in 7, 8, 9, 10. I was out on the lake on Sunday. In the middle of the lake, we had 12 feet of water. The edge of the lake, it was 4.5 feet. Where the cattail met the marsh met the lake, it was 4.5 feet of water. And we can't plant under those conditions. With the water clarity the way it is, the image on the left is Secchidius readings our fisheries biologists have taken. And we only get 12 to 18 inches worth of light penetration when looking through with the Secchi disc. So turbidity is an issue. In fact, the biennial report from DEP for impaired water bodies came out the other day, and they have added turbidity as an impairment on Lake Trafford. Not only do we have nitrogen, phosphorus, chlorophyll A, and unionized ammonia as an impairment on the lake, we now have turbidity as one of the issues that DEP recommends as an impairment. And which brings us to Mike's interest, aquatic plant and sediment removal. We have the technology to do this. We have harvesters. We have large magnet excavators. We have on Lake Okeechobee a couple of years ago, aquaculture came in with their pumps and their juicer is what they call it. And they were able to grind up plants and send it 4 miles Indian Prairie Canal to a ranch. So we have disposal. The district has offered us the land they use for the confined disposal facility to dispose of material. We have the permits. We have a 15-year permit from the Corps of Engineers to do this type of work. So why aren't we doing it? Why can't we do it? Well, number one, and we didn't figure this out until we started working, is much of the lake marsh is actually in private ownership. That southwest corner of the lake is basically from 19 feet or just a couple hundred feet from the edge of the marsh is owned by the Baron Collier organization. There's only really a couple places on the lake. One is up in the northwest corner where the county owns part of the marsh. The state owns, TIF owns part of the marsh on the southeast part of the lake. And the county owns some property up around the Pepper Ranch area, but we can't work on private land. We can't spend state money on private land. Mike was asking about the $37,500 an acre. We tried to bid out a project a few years ago using district money. The district gave us $250,000 to do a plant removal and sediment removal project. We bid it out. We had one vendor that bid. We thought we could do about 20 acres. The $250,000 let us do about 7 acres because you're taking the material about 2 miles across the lake. Then you have to truck it up the road to the disposal area. And it's just expensive. It's super expensive. And on top of that, following the dredging work that was done, our Division of Historical Resources and the tribe, they consider the entire lake to be a cultural resource. No longer can we just say, oh, we'll have one of our archaeological monitors, and all our biologists are archaeological monitors with DHR. No longer can we be the monitors. We have to hire an archaeologist to monitor projects when we are doing sediment removal. Not only that, we did a project, our fisheries folks did a project where we were putting down 6 fish spawning beds, 3 around the pier and 3 out on the lake. Not only did we need to have DHR comment on that, it took over a year for us to get the permit from the Corps of Engineers, and we weren't digging sediment. We were putting rocks down on the bottom. About 4/10 of an acre total. We spent $25,000 to have an archaeological survey done. The project itself only cost us $10,000. When we were going to do the sediment removal project, the plant removal project, we had to get an archaeologist. They were going to charge us $2,500 a day, and we had to provide the boat to get them out on the lake, which meant our staff had to be out there every single day with them. But whenever the barge, the excavator, the harvester was working, they had to be out on the lake to see what was coming up. So that is a real constraint. Those 3 items are real constraints on us being able to remove sediment and plants from the lake. The other issues that we face are obviously the effects of storms. We stocked a lot of bass, 500,000 bass, Florida largemouth bass in the lake following the dredging project. Well, we were doing pretty good. Then in 2017, Irma came. And all of a sudden you see that dark black line, bloop, drops. Those are stock size fish. Those are 2nd-year fish. And we lost the habitat that those fish were able to use. And you can see the dotted line where it's adult fish. And what we found is when you lose those fish from your recruitable stock, those 2nd-year fish, when they're no longer there, you no longer have adult fish. And so our bass fishery has really crashed in response to the hurricanes. The other challenge is water quality. We have state standards for water quality on the lake. It's 20 parts per billion for chlorophyll, 1.27 for nitrogen. They have it as parts per million, 0.05 parts per billion, but everywhere that I've ever gone, phosphorus is measured in parts per billion, and that equates to 50 parts per billion. And they want a Secchi disc of greater than 0.85, which is about 2.5 feet. That I don't know I've ever been on the lake where I had 2.5 feet with a Secchi disc reading. So I went to Rhonda Watkins with Collier County Pollution Control. I said, hey, can you send me some numbers? These are the same numbers she presented to the Basin Board back in October. And you can see that phosphorus has never been at the target level of 50 parts per billion. It's never been there. It even went up during the dredge, but I mean, essentially we're sticking around about 100, 125, 150 parts per billion for phosphorus. And that's 3 times what we want in the lake. You go to nitrogen, and just to be clear, phosphorus is more of a surface water issue. We get phosphorus when we get water washing into the lake, when we get runoff into the lake. Nitrogen is generally a groundwater issue, and it's a much harder thing to address. But we got the same issues, 2 to 3 times higher than what our target levels are in the lake, and that's just generating more and more algae in the lake. And greener lake, still a hypertrophic lake. And the same thing with chlorophyll. You know, we got a little bit of a drop during the dredging because we were pulling 6 million yards out of the lake of material. We were pumping water out of the lake. We were getting that algae out of the lake, but you can see we're still well above our target levels. So, where do we go from here? Well, one of the issues that we have in the lake is Trafford Slough. It's the spray field that City of Immokalee had within that watershed. I was provided the numbers of just a couple months ago, and the phosphorus levels coming at the outfall of the spray field are 3,500 parts per billion. That's 70 times, not 70%, 70 times. So if you want to put a percentage on it, that's 7,000% higher than our target on the lake. We've got to get the lake cleaner. For us to be able to do restoration work, for us to get the lake where we want it to be, the lake has got to be cleaner. We got to have clear water. We're not going to plant SAV in the lake anymore because we can't get it to grow more than a year. So, and I'm not sure what to do about, you know, the spray field issues. You know, some of the recommendations that we've talked about within the management team is we're going to continue to plant emergent and immersed plants. We have a technique with Lotus that we think might work. It's actually taking seed pods. We drill a little hole in the seed pod and literally put the seed pods in a tank, let them start growing out, and then we'll throw them out. Throw out the seeds with the Lotus starting to grow out of it, shower with enough water to begin with, and see if we can get them to grow. Not even have to get in the water. We're just going to throw them out, no concrete. We're going to see if we can get them to grow that way. 3 years ago, I came to this meeting because my project manager is actually Rodney Hudson. He gave a presentation to the Basin Board. And at that same meeting, the district had somebody, one of their engineers, talk about the circulating filter marsh using the confined disposal facility as circulating filter marsh. And it was anywhere from $25 to $40 million to be able to do that. And his conclusion was it's not going to be very efficient. We've got to look at some way of treating water in the lake somehow. And I have a feeling that's where Mike might want to weigh in. But we've got to figure out a way to get water cleaned up that's already in the lake. You can see on the slide, that's the Williams Preserve. It's 1.25 miles up the road from Trafford, Lake Trafford Road, right on the road. And if the county develops that property, there needs to be BMPs in place to prevent water from getting into the lake. You know, anytime that you put down hard surfaces, and I'm preaching to the choir to the district knows this, but anytime you put impervious surface at replacing dirt, grass, a marsh, you are going to increase the amount of water getting into the lake. Before Trafford Road was developed, it was a dirt road. You probably didn't have the same issues, but once you have paved a road, you put down concrete, you're going to get more water moving to wherever you may not want it to go. So, and the third is, and I'm lost here, is figure out options to manage sediments in the lake. And then maybe if we want to do another dredging project, and to be honest, the lake isn't in that bad of a shape relative to what it was, 15 years ago. But the area in front of Trafford Slough has about 1.5 feet of organic sediment on the bottom. The middle of the lake has about 2 feet of organic sediment on the bottom. But you will go along the eastern shoreline, you go along the western shoreline where it's the pond apple marsh, is not necessarily the cattail marsh. It's actually pretty clean. It's hard bottom. There's not a lot of sediment on the bottom, but you get down to the south end where the muck is back in the marsh, you are starting to build up material because it's moving into the lake. It has nowhere to go. You go back in the marsh, you'll be almost up to your waist in organic sediment. So, any options that anybody has. I know we don't want to do another dredging project. And even if we did, again, you're going to have to do a 1,500 acre archaeological survey to be able to use that dredge on the lake bottom. So those are the things that the management team has considered. Those are the things that my staff has considered. If you have any questions, please ask them. But this is sort of the take-home message. The way we need to keep Lake Trafford clean, what we need to do, and this is said 20, 30, 40 times in the management plan, you got to keep the nutrients and sediment out of the lake. It is much more cost effective to do it that way, as opposed to trying to do it, taking water, pumping water out of the lake, building a filter marsh, all those different things, doing mechanical removal. We've got to figure out a way to keep nutrients from getting into the lake. So, thank you.
What a great briefing, Beecham. That was full of great information, and I'm sure there are questions that we have for you.
I do want to say, I apologize. I do want to extend the invitation to any of the board members. Our staff is more than willing to take, and I know y'all can't go out in the same boat, but more than willing to get y'all out on the lake. Let you see the lake. It looked pretty good on Sunday, but it was also dead flat. When the wind picks up, it's a different issue. But I extend the invitation, anybody, any of the board members that want to get out on the lake, just talk to Lisa. Lisa will give me a call and we'll get the airboat out there for y'all to get out.
And it's worth your time to go ahead and actually see Lake Trafford. I was a little bit taken back by the fact that I was a Florida Master Naturalist student during the dredging of Lake Trafford. Fast forward to when I joined the Basin board, and wow, we have gone full circle. And I was wondering if you had a thought about the contributing factors to the decline of the lake from the point that we dredged to the point we are at now.
Well, I can tell you one issue, and it's a simple issue, and it's unaddressable, is the lake hasn't gone below 18 feet in the last 11 years. The lake doesn't go down, and it's not a function of water control. It's the fact that, we had several events between 2007 and 2013 where the lake got below 18 feet. The lake bottom dried out. And I'm sure that was a huge issue into the success of the dredging project, especially when the lake went down to 15 feet, because all those sediments that were in the, we're calling the littoral zone of the lake, which is really just the shallow water part of the lake. Those sediments went back to the middle. So it made it much more easier to do dredging once those sediments had gone back to the middle. So we need another drought, which nobody wants to hear, I know. But you need more low water events from nature. We need to stop getting, I can't say it enough, until the lake gets clearer, whether that's reducing nutrients that are coming into the lake, whether that's doing some type of filter marsh project, just pumping material somewhere. And it doesn't have to be pumping sediment. It may just be pumping water out of the lake if we had a place to put it and let it flow. I'll even offer up, if a filter marsh is developed, FWC will pay for the plants that go in that filter marsh. If there was a place that we could do it, we would pay for the plants. We would pay for the transplanting of wetland plants. You just got to find a place and a way to do it, and we'll be there for you.
I appreciate that. That was our initial thought as a board, when we looked at the spoil area, but that had its own complications. But that was exactly what we were looking at 3 years ago when Rodney came to brief. So let's see if there are board questions. Are there any questions from the board? Any hands raised? Okay. Okay, Vice Chair Waters, go ahead.
Beecham, thanks for the presentation and all the work you do out here. Had a couple questions and then a quick thought at the end. One was, I never really thought about the hydrilla and how that was, you said the word was introduced. And so I was just curious, the history of that. Is that something that somebody thought it was a good idea to bring hydrilla into the lake?
I'm sure there was somebody that thought it was a good idea. And I apologize, I interrupt you, I apologize.
Yep. No worries.
The bass fishermen, duck hunters love hydrilla. I had one of our duck biologists actually say at a public meeting that hydrilla is duck candy. They love top dot hydrilla. So I'm sure that somebody maybe brought it in the late 60s, maybe even earlier than that. What I hated the word introduced when I used it, because it wasn't purposely introduced by any state agency. But once hydrilla is in the lake, and it is a shallow lake. It's not like we're talking about 50 feet deep. We're talking about a lake when the water's at the edge of the marsh that is anywhere from 2 to maybe 8 feet deep at the center. And when you have a clear lake, like we did, a clearer lake, like we had in the 60s and early 70s, hydrilla is going to take off. It's going to outcompete the other plants that are in the middle of the lake. And once it got established and got down the turons and tubers, the little seeds that hydrilla puts out, and you can have thousands and thousands of those little seeds, those turons and tubers, for every square foot once you have enough hydrilla that's topped out. And it makes it hard to get rid of it once hydrilla has become established.
Gotcha. Thank you. And then the second thing I wanted to throw out is I think there's a recognition from Collier County that to what you alluded to, a lot of this area from the developed portions of Immokalee get into the Immokalee Slough and then get into the lake. And some of these areas were developed so long ago, there wasn't any standard for how it got developed, any requirement to include BMPs. And Collier County's got a master plan that they've developed called they call it the IMSIP, the Immokalee Stormwater Improvement Plan, that is essentially going to establish a handful of different BMPs that the county will kind of come back and retrofit and capture water that currently is directly getting into that slough and going into Lake Trafford and routed into stormwater ponds or other facilities to clean it up before it gets into the slough and then eventually into the lake. And the first one of those, which is built almost completed on the north side of the Immokalee Slough within the Arrowhead community I was involved with. It's going to be kind of a series of stormwater ponds / filter marshes. There basically was a fairly significant part of that budget went into planting the ponds that they're going to have that they've constructed there. And so one thing I would say, we ought to keep in mind as the county moves forward with the other phases of that stormwater improvement plan for Immokalee, if there is a possibility they could work with you all and, get expertise on what they should plant and get some assistance in, saving money on the installation by you guys having a willingness to come in and plant that. I think that would be a good partnership to pursue, and with the county, potentially buying that Williams property. My guess is there may be some other projects that develop out of that that you all should be involved in and leveraged with. So want to just kind of throw that out, that it's not all going to happen overnight, but the county does have a recognition that there's a need to improve the quality of that stormwater coming out of Immokalee and going into the lake. And then real quickly, the last thing I had or a question for you is in terms of, it sounds like one of the things that makes vegetation difficult to sustain in the lake is the flashiness. Do we know whether the lake is now flashier than it was between ag and residential development around it? Or has this just always been the way it's been in terms of how those water levels change out there?
I'll be honest with you, I'm just not sure. The record of data I have is going back to 2007. And if you look at the hydrograph, every year the lake goes up above 21 feet. I think there may have been one year where it stayed around 19, but every year, even when the lake gets low, it pops back up 21 feet. And, that keeps the marsh inundated. It keeps the sediments wet. But I mean, short answer to your question, I don't know how it was prior to, the development of the watershed. I just know now we're in a situation where we can't control water. We have to deal with the water levels we have. And so we just have to hope that every few years we don't have a lot of rain and the lake gets below 18 feet and we get part of the lake dried out, and we can maybe push those emergent plants a little bit farther out and get them established before the lake pops back up.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, that's all I had, ma'am. Thank you.
I did want to say one thing. For us to be able to use our money, there has to be some type of public access. So, and we're more than willing to help out, planting plants, getting plants planted, helping develop a filter marsh, but there has to be some form of public access, even if it is a track around Storm Pond where people can go in there and walk and look at the plants. It unfortunately can't just be, oh, we got it closed off to the public and look at all those ducks and wading birds in there. Even though there's extremely good value in that, for us to be able to use our money, it has to be public lands with public access.
Good to know.
Some
Thank
form
you.
of public access.
Madam Chair.
Yes, it's coming back to me. I was just making sure that Vice Chair Waters was through. We have Michelle McLeod next.
I might be able to answer one of.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Mr. Waters, you had asked if the lake was always flashy, and I understand going back to 1940 on the period of record for the lake, we've always seen that flashiness. It always goes back to 20.
That's a very interesting challenge that poses for us as we look to solutions to address some of the issues that you've raised today.
The irony of it is We have all these other water bodies who are saying, oh, dang it, we got water control. The lake won't go up. We can't bring the lake down low enough. And here we have a lake that goes up and down on its own. It's just, it's flashier than we would want it to be able to grow plants. And other than the late 2000s, early 2010s, right after the dredging project, and I'll shut up after this, but after the dredging project was completed, the lake was low enough for long enough where we had over 200 acres of eelgrass that grew, 200 acres. And our goal for any type of vegetation in the lake is 30%, 450 acres. Now, I'm not sure if we'll ever get there, but we had over 200 acres of eelgrass that grew when the lake got low enough to get it established. Unfortunately, once the lake got back up and stayed up high enough for long enough, the eelgrass disappeared. So.
Ms. McLeod, you're next. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Beecham. This is Michelle McLeod. Thank you for your very real and honest presentation. I have several different questions here for you. First off, out of curiosity, where did that 6 million cubic yards of muck go? You said that it was taken to a facilities about 2 miles away. How was that muck material processed? And is there any good use of that material?
Somebody from the district may be able to answer this better, but in every news release that has been released following the dredging project, it talks about 6 million cubic yards of material. That material was placed at it's called a CDF, a confined disposal facility. Basically, berms are built around the side and you dump the material in the middle of it. You have a series of these bermed off areas, and the dredge material is super wet. It's 90% water when it gets pushed from the dredge, from the lake, 2+ miles of pipe. And then that water is moved through those cells, and the sediment remains, and the water gets returned to the lake. And that area remains, as Charlotte mentioned, the original intent was to try to use it as a filter marsh, and it just doesn't seem super feasible right now. But yeah, that's the number that was reported by the district, 6 million yards.
And I think Lisa has something to add to it, Beecham.
Yeah, thank you. Ms. McLeod, if I understood your question, you also wanted to know where that impoundment area is. And it is just north of Lake Trafford, and it is also the site where we are putting our Basin communication tower, is up in one of those corners of that particular area. And as Beecham said, it's about 2 miles, 2 miles from the lake.
I don't know the name of the road, but it's the first road to the right coming down Trafford,
right?
Lake Trafford Road.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. All right, so then you're saying it's mostly water and then the sediment gets put aside to a different location.
No, the sediment stays in the location, in the
facility. Okay.
in the facility, the CDF. The water is returned to the lake after it goes through a series of cells, and basically sediment drops out, it moves to another cell, more sediment drops out. I mean, I'm being oversimplest because I don't understand the whole deal, but eventually that water is returned, and it's returned at hopefully much clearer, hopefully, because you also have wetland plants that are growing within the CDF, and those wetland plants are removing nutrients as that water is being moved back to the lake. And that's the whole concept of trying to use it as a filter marsh.
Okay, so thank you for trying to keep this discussion simple, because I am not an engineer or scientist or anything like that. So I'm trying to understand it. It seems unfortunate that we're cleaning the muck, but then only for the water to come back. And that's something that we don't want, which leads me to my next question as to what to do with that water. Is there any way that we can store that water underground? Like pump it and move it to a different location underground?
I'm gonna let the district address that, but I mean, it's a project that occurred 15 years ago. If we wanted to do another dredging project, I mean, that would be an option or it's something to look at, but the whole concept of the circulating filter marsh is you're pumping water up to the facility site. You're letting the water move through that marsh, those series of vegetated cells, aquatic plant, wetland plant cells. And as the water moves through those cells, it is eventually returned to the lake. And the idea is that you've gone from phosphorus or nitrogen levels that are super high to at least they are to the level that we hope is or it's a state standard, 50 parts per billion for phosphorus, using an example. One thing that in my conversations with Rhonda Watkins with Collier County Pollution Control is, the question is, are we receiving water from the CDF through groundwater already that's coming into the lake? And what is the condition of that water that's moving? Because we know that phosphorus is coming from surface water, through canals, through runoff, et cetera. But the nitrogen that comes into the lake is generally from the groundwater. So that's something that Rhonda and I have discussed. Don't know what we're getting from the CDF. But no, that it has to be cleaner than it was when it went up there, but I'm not sure how much cleaner.
Okay. On a different note, what is the future of fishing look like on the lake or in the lake?
The
Because you had
future,
mentioned, yes,
Yes,
what's the
yes,
future of fishing there?
Our fishery staff may want to introduce or may want to stock more bass. Right now, we don't have very good conditions for bass. Maybe if we can get some other plants growing, but from the people that we've talked to, the black crappie fishery is actually pretty good. Black crappie don't need the same type of spawning conditions that bass do. So speck fishing, black crappie fishing is actually decent. I wouldn't call it great, but it's decent in the lake. And if you're a commercial fisherman, the fishery is wonderful. I was out on Sunday and there were a dozen or more commercial fishermen on the lake throwing their cast nets, and every one of them said almost every time they go out there, they get 500 pounds or more. There are days that they get 2,000 pounds of tilapia, just cast netting, not using a big seine, cast netting. They're getting as much as 2,000 pounds of blue tilapia. And they also take some of the other exotic fish like the sailfin catfish and the brown hoplos. There are a few cichlids. Mayan cichlids is an example in the lake. And all of those exotic fish can be taken. There's no limit on those, no size limit, no bag limit. But if you're a commercial fisherman, it's wonderful. If you're an alligator, it's even better to throw that in, because a survey that our alligator management biologist did in 2001 and 2023, they counted over 600 alligators in a 32-minute survey. That's one alligator every 3 seconds. And I said, there's no way y'all did that. There's no way y'all counted. He said, no, but a third of the alligators, we just said, that's an alligator. And they were going so fast. And so many of these alligators don't even use the marsh necessarily when they're counting them. They basically do a circle around the lake, and they do smaller circles so they get to the middle of the lake, because they see so many alligators just out in open water. But in fact, the only lake that I think is maybe comparable is Lake Hancock. And if any of y'all are familiar with Lake Hancock in Polk County, it is even in worse condition than Lake Trafford. But interestingly enough, we still have people that fish Lake can come down to Lake Trafford to fish. But as a comparison, on Lake Istapoga, where I do a lot of work, 28,000 acre lake, our alligator management staff allow 44 permits over the four hunting periods. On Lake Trafford by itself, there are 36 permits on a 1,500 acre lake versus a 28,000 acre lake. And it's not super popular with some people. For example, the marina is called Airboats and Alligators because they make a lot of money for good reason, taking a tour airboat out and running a circle around the lake and literally seeing dozens and dozens of alligators, many of them well over 8, 10, and 12 feet. So it is an important resource if you're an alligator or you're an alligator tourism company.
Good. Well, I'm glad to hear that positive news on fishing. And then just one last thing, I am going to take you up on your offer to come out to Lake Trafford and take a look around. Thank you so much for this very informative presentation.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Ms. McLeod. And I've been out with FWC out on the lake, and it's a great experience to learn more in-depth knowledge about what's going on out there. If only the alligators could help us clean the water, we'd be in good shape, right? Okay, let's go to public comment. Oh, excuse me, Ms. Smith, I just saw you pop up there on my screen. Go ahead.
My only comment would be, well, first of all, thank you for the immense amount of intel. It's fantastic. I would also like to take you up on that offer. I would love to do a site visit. Thank you.
We can take out, we can take out 2, 3, 4 boats if that's what it takes. If we have multiple people that want to go on the same day, but if it's just one person, one board member, set it up with Lisa. She'll give me a call. We'll get the boat down there. We'll get you a tour of the lake.
Great, and Lisa will help coordinate that.
Yes, ma'am.
That's probably the best way, Beecham. Okay, let's go to public comment. Troy, do we have any public comment?
I have one hand raised on Zoom. Mike Elfenbein.
You
Mike,
nailed
they're
it.
going to be, there you go. Well, I try to get better, sir.
That's great. Beecham, that was a great presentation. You know, Beecham's been institutional figurehead in the state of Florida to help improve our lakes, and I don't think the stakeholders could be any prouder of him for the things he's accomplished. But in listening to this and understanding some of the obstacles are, as they usually are in government funding, I think, 15 years ago, they spent $22 million to fix a lake that 15 years later is halfway back to being what it was 15 years ago. And so things have changed a lot in those days. Technology has advanced. Beecham mentioned the successful project on Lake Okeechobee. That project was able to remove that sediment for half of what the price was for Lake Trafford. And as time's gone on, those costs have come down considerably to the point where that technology with the district is going to be implemented here starting in the next couple of weeks on Lake Istapoga, addressing some of the same issues that are being discussed for Lake Trafford. And so I agree with Beecham on his position of not planning any more submerged aquatic vegetation. It's just kind of throwing money away until the water quality is improved. But my point in all this is to say is that it's not impossible. There is an opportunity. The technology does exist. The district is harnessing it, and it's just a matter of will and desire as to whether or not the district or the Big Cypress Basin Board would entertain employing that technology in Lake Trafford. Some of you might not know me, but I've been known to accommodate some pretty fantastic field trips. And so if, while we're in the mood of invitations for field trips, if any of the board would be interested in seeing that technology at work through that district project at Lake Istapoga, I think I know a couple people and could arrange that. But all hope is not lost for Trafford. Let's all work together to make it better. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, and thanks for extending that invitation to the board. The one question that I have for you, Beecham, is right now we have a Lake Trafford management team that looks over the lake and how it is managed. And to me, it appears that has a more present and day-to-day type of strategy for looking at the lake. What you've presented today appears more to what we need to do going forward in a more of a big picture contextual way of things to get the lake moving forward in a positive direction. And I thought we approached that in a way 3 years ago that we were going to have some results. We're looking for nearby opportunities for land to do a filter marsh that would clean the water prior to it, rolling into the lake. Or holding water, maybe to take some of the depth of the water in the lake off the lake to give those plants a chance. I'm still open to that if we can find a strategy to where something becomes available, and I don't know what that is, but I'd like to see Lisa maybe continue coordination with your team and others to see if we need to put a working group together or something that's not the management of the lake, but is the future of the lake or what we could do going forward. And maybe we could bring everybody's conversation and ideas to the table.
Yes, ma'am.
Great. Thank you so much. Anything else? Thank you, Beecham. Really appreciate it. Very important discussion today.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that brings us to our next discussion item, which is restoring plant communities and aquatic fauna with the Picayune Strand Restoration Project. And we have Dr. Armstrong joining us by Zoom. Go ahead, Dr. Armstrong.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am having some, thank you for sharing the slides. I'm having some technical difficulties here on my end, so, but I think we'll be okay. So, as Colonel Roman said, I am Cassandra Armstrong. I'm the Bureau Chief for the Applied Sciences Bureau, and today I'm going to give you a brief status check on the restoration efforts of Picayune Strand, focusing on vegetation and aquatic fauna response to restored hydrology. The Picayune Strand was a cypress-dominated ecosystem, but in the 1960s, developers dug canals to drain the land and built roads to establish the Golden Gate community. This resulted in a vegetation shift to upland species, increased fire frequency and intensity. We lost a lot of habitat, and there were downstream impacts to the estuary. Next slide. And we have here some vegetation maps that demonstrate the degree of shift to upland species. Between the 1940 and 1995, we lost 20% of the cypress, which is shown in this map in light blue. And it was replaced by sable palm hammock in orange and pine flatwoods in brown. We also lost a lot of freshwater marsh, which is in the pink. So it was a pretty devastating shift in the vegetation community. Next slide. So through the plugging of canals and the removal of the roads, the Picayune Restoration Project strives to rehydrate the area with sheet flow, reestablish the hydrology to create and restore habitat, and recharge aquifers, reduce fires, and improve the salinity in the estuaries. Next slide. There are 6 key project milestones, 3 of which are completed. The first was the plugging of the upper 3 miles of Faka Union Canal. It was mostly complete in 2021 and went active, but there were a few additional tasks that were completed in 2022. The Miller Tram and roads were removed last year, and the lower Faka Union Canal was plugged this spring. The remaining milestones will be completed soon, with the Miller Canal plugging to start in January and be completed by the end of next year. Next slide. The goal is to reestablish the natural hydro period of the area. The y-axis on this graph is the number of months of continuous wet conditions, with the driest conditions being at the top of the graph and the wettest conditions are at the bottom. The hydro period for Cypress is in between 6 and 8 months of wet conditions. So this is what we are striving to achieve with our restoration efforts. Next slide. This graph shows the hydro period near the south end of Merritt Canal. The y-axis is in days of inundation with the driest conditions at the bottom, so it's the reverse of the previous slide. The ideal Cypress hydro period is indicated in the green, so that is between 200 and 250 days, so to speak. You can see that the dry conditions prior to the Merritt Canal plugging and the stair-step canal plugging, and how the hydro period is now in the appropriate range for Cypress. So we are now achieving conditions for Cypress restoration to occur. Next slide. These pictures show what it looks like on the ground. On the left, there is a map of what you can see is the FACA pump station, and there's a little white dot to the southeast, and that is where these pictures are taken. The top picture is looking east while standing at that little white dot, and the bottom picture is looking west, and you can actually see the conveyance structure in the background of the bottom picture there. But you can see the water is on the landscape and at depth. Next slide. To evaluate our restoration efforts, monitoring sites were set up throughout the area and represent different plant communities and different restoration phases. There are restored sites, unrestored sites, and reference sites that represent the conditions we are trying to achieve. So the blue dots are the reference sites over in the Fakahatchee Strand area and then the Florida Panther National Wildlife Refuge. The green are what are currently being monitored for upland and freshwater wetlands, and then we've got orange ones down, coastal wetlands down at the bottom that are not currently being monitored, and the X's are where we are currently having monitoring stations. And at each of those stations, we are monitoring the vegetation communities and the aquatic faunal communities. Next slide. So first, we're going to talk about our vegetation sampling. So within each of those plots, we set up a 50-meter transect that represents a single plant community, so cypress or pine or whatever is there. And then we take measurements for all the different layers within that canopy structure, so the canopy, the subcanopy, the shrub layer, and then finally the ground cover. Also, evidence of fire is noted, and then what is called photo points or photographs are taken at specific locations and then analyzed for things like amount of leaf coverage and things of that nature. So we get a full suite of what the vegetation is looking like at this site, both density, species, fire condition, etc. Next slide. So we pull out 3 different types of plant communities to take a look at. We've got cypress at the top, pinelands in the middle, and wet prairie at the bottom. And let me run you through the construct of these graphs so that you understand what we're seeing here. The x-axis, or the line at the bottom, is time in years. And the y-axis is what's called a wetland affinity index, which evaluates the effects of hydrologic condition on plant communities. So closer to 1 means that we are having a full wetland affinity. 0 is none. The dotted lines represent our reference condition or our target that we're trying to get back to. And the solid line is where we actually are within that site. So you can see with the top graph and the cypress, we are in an upward trajectory, meaning we're moving towards reference conditions, but there is still a pretty good gap between where we are and where we want to be. With the pinelands, the trajectory up is a little faster, and we're actually getting pretty close to our reference site. Excuse Excuse me, I'm suffering from a cold. I'm about to lose my voice. And then lastly, at the bottom is our wet prairie. Those are grass-dominated systems, and you can see the recovery of those has been very rapid, and we're very close to our reference point. Next slide. Next, we took a look at the aquatic fauna. And for those, we took samples 3 times a year representing different times of the water year. And we employed different techniques to measure the different fauna communities depending on what type of community that we are looking at. So for this presentation, I'm going to focus on the aquatic invertebrates, and that includes such things as snails, mussels, crayfish, amphibians, things of that nature. Next slide. So this graph represents the state of the aquatic fauna in different areas. We've got the unrestored area, restored area, and then again our reference area. The graph on the left, it represents the average number of individuals in the 3 site types, and the graph on the right is an index of species richness, or how many species are located at those sites. Both measures show that restoration is positively impacted on macroinvertebrates compared to the unrestored areas, but we still have a ways to go to get to full recovery. Next slide. So in summary, we are seeing recovery of vegetation and fauna. The fast growing prairie is recovering faster than the slower growing trees, but it's happening in all of the vegetation communities. Same for the fauna. They are moving back into the area primarily because they can move to a preferred area quickly. With continued restoration efforts, these systems will undoubtedly return to the reference conditions that we are trying to target. And lastly, next slide. I also wanted to share with you some trail cam photos that one of my staff recently took. The upper left is a Florida panther walking through the area at night. The lower right is a cute little deer. And if you'll be so kind to press the play button on the middle one, you'll get to see. There we go.
I just love these.
So that little guy was walking through the area as my staff member was in the process of collecting his trail cams from the trail. So fun little interaction there. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Cassandra, that at least the staff had the camera at the ready in order to shoot that video for us, which was great. Are there any board members that have questions?
No.
Okay, Andy, go ahead.
Dr. Armstrong, with time of an issue to me, the Cypress, it looks like we're getting close to positive conditions to expand the Cypress population within the Picayune. Would that be correct?
That is correct, yep.
Okay, good. How are you going to go about doing that? Are you going to wait for nature to run its cycle, which will probably, that cycle will probably take place long after I'm gone? Is there a way to hurry up the process through planting, seedings, etc.?
That would definitely be one way that we could help encourage, because you are spot on. It's going to take a while for the cypress to go through their circles. It's going to need to have the trees in the areas that are currently there to die back. It needs to then migrate into the area, establish itself, and grow, and cypress grow very slowly. So
Yes.
I'm not sure if it's part of the plan for planting of cypress, but that would definitely be one way to help speed up the long-term trajectory for them.
How could it be included if it made sense from a environmental standpoint, and people like yourself believe that was an option? How would we then facilitate that process to get going? Is there a money issue which could be addressed easily?
Those are questions above my pay grade.
Okay.
But I would think that, yes, if there is money, which I'm not in charge of the budget on this project, so I'm not sure where we are expense-wise, but it is possible, let's put it that way. There is a path
Okay.
forward if there's a will.
Then I'll speak to Lisa Keeler about possibilities in that area. And then here's my last question for you. Where would be the best spot to put the airport? It looks like, in the photo you have in front of us at the end of for Q&A, it would be great to have that runway right down between those trees. Wouldn't that be a good spot?
No comment.
Yeah, I think
I'm finished.
you might want to correct those comments so that we're not planning to put any airport as a district
was
in
a
the middle of the
joke.
Picayune Strand. We want to make sure. Thank you, Andy. Are there any other board comments? I have one thing, Dr. Armstrong. What is the life cycle of a bald cypress tree? How long does it take to grow? I observed FWC doing some seedling plantings in the marsh of Lake Okeechobee. They were small trees that they were planting. What time does it take for that small seedling to grow up into a decent sized tree? Can you give me a feel for that?
It's about 50 years.
About 50 years to be a full size tree.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Any public comment on this one, Troy?
Yes, ma'am. We have one here in the room and one on Zoom. Here in the room with us, Brad Cornell. Brad will be followed on Zoom by Mike Elfenbein.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and board members. Brad Cornell on behalf of Audubon Western Everglades and Audubon, Florida. I wanted to add a couple of comments that were really related to Dr. Armstrong's presentation. So there's a really important element of restoration of flora and fauna, which was the subject of this report, in the reduction of nutrients and other pollution that are documented at the Tam monitoring site, which is Tomato Road and US 41. And the reason is that while the Picayune Strand proper is the old South Golden Gate Estates, over 55,000 acres, there's a lot of benefits that are part of the goal of restoring Picayune Strand that are the estuaries downstream. So these are outstanding Florida waters, the 10,000 Islands, Rookery Bay, and those habitats below that actual active restoration project. So it's important that water going there, restoration waters, is clean. Currently at the Tam site, the phosphorus readings are over 300 parts per billion. That's pretty high, and that's way too high for putting into outstanding Florida waters. Our Everglades goal, as you know, is about 10 parts per billion. So we're way off on that. Audubon applauds the district for sending a water quality enforcement letter to Littman Farms in May of 2023. And we see here a response from the Littman Farms folks that has a proposal, a positive proposal for a two-phase strategy to cooperatively improve water quality that's coming off of their farm operations. This is good. However, I want to point out in this proposal, the phase 2 part is really ill-defined. It's not clear at all because they didn't know themselves what would be appropriate. So Audubon is looking for some updates on where we are in that process of collaborating with Littman Farms. Also, there's some urgency to this because it's a very positive thing that Picayune Strand is coming in for completion in this coming year, in 2025. This is a wonderful thing. But it means as the Miller Canal gets plugged starting in January, we need to see water quality where restoration flows are going to be pushing that water south into the OFWs. We need to see it improved. So that gives us two options. One is source control with Littman's collaborating with them. So that's why I'm asking for the update. And the second is there was a water quality feasibility study and siting effort that was aimed at putting stormwater treatment areas and other water quality facilities to clean up this pollution. I have not heard where we are now, but that also is the second strategy. We need some further updating, and again, this is urgent. It's a very positive reason it's urgent because we're going to finish this project, but this is an important part. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, our next speaker joining us on Zoom is Mike Elfenbein. Mike, you're being prompted to unmute yourself. If you'll do so, you have 3
Yes,
minutes,
sir.
Mike.
Thank you so much. You know, at the governing board meeting a couple of weeks ago, I made a recommendation, and I'm going to keep making this recommendation until I hear somebody go with it. Somewhere, maybe Picayune is the place for that. A bronze statue of Charlotte Roman needs to be erected. Maybe like an image of her curating an orchid. But Charlotte's passion and determination to see Picayune completed and restored has been unequaled and unrivaled in this community for a long time. And she deserves the kudos for that. But more importantly, as a guy who spends a lot of time recreating in Southwest Florida and in Picayune, my son harvesting his first turkey there on public land several years ago, it's near and dear to my heart. And I understand and recognize the goals and ambitions of restoration, but I just want to keep something in context. And that is that before these areas were ditched and diked and drained, they were wetlands, and that's what we're trying to reestablish. But at that time, the east and western coastal ridges of the state provided all the upland habitat that upland species like the Florida panther depended on. And while we still see Florida panthers in some of our developed areas like Golden Gate and Naples and off of 951, the restoration of upland habitat to wetland habitat is significantly going to decrease the available habitat for terrestrial species like the Florida panther. And I mentioned in a general public comment, this has happened before, namely in Water Conservation Area 3A, where Alligator Ron always brings to everyone's attention that in the 80s, if you looked at a telemetry map of Water Conservation Area 3A, it was covered in dots resembling the places that panthers were using. And if you look at those telemetry maps later on, after some of these restoration projects began, those panthers no longer use that habitat. The same could be said for much of Everglades National Park, but for different reasons, mostly because the prey species they rely on no longer exist there. And so while we celebrate the success of restoring Picayune, I just want to make sure everybody has in the back of their mind is that we're writing on paper that we're championing this restoration for Florida panthers, as the presentation by Dr. Armstrong suggested. But the reality is that we're going to have negative consequences, not only for panthers, but for the prey species that depended on that upland habitat. So hopefully we can figure all this out so we don't spend the next 50 years trying to figure out how to undo what we've done the last 50 years. Thank you guys for all this wonderful information. Looking forward to the rest of the meeting.
Any further public comment?
That is all the public comment we have, ma'am.
Thank you for your comments. And Brad, as an update for you, I understand that there are surveys going on with the farm this week and next to continue with that exploration for that second phase of the plan. So that gives you an update in that part. And the all the work with the stakeholders and the public that we did in looking at the siting or possible project for a water quality component or a restoration component to the project is still ongoing. And you, as you know, since you participated in many of those discussions, the amount of land that is available for us to actually site such a project is limited. So that's what has slowed us down, but that is still ongoing as well. And I appreciate, Mike, your comments concerning the panthers. That is an important aspect of this, although, you know, the Picayune Strand Restoration Project encompasses 55,000 acres. There's still, it's surrounded by the greater forest as well. So we have to keep our eye on that. I would agree. And I appreciate the public comments today on this item, and I appreciate Dr. Armstrong's presentation. It's great to see some of the flora and fauna coming back out there. It really is. And I'm very excited that the Corps is committed to finishing the Picayune Strand Restoration Project next year. And as many of you participated in our celebration for a major milestone, which was the plugging of the Faki Union Canal. As you recall, in 2021, we looked at hydrologic modeling that said that we could plug the first 3.3 miles of the Faki Union Canal in order to turn on the Faki Union pump station. And with the Corps' cooperation, we were able to do that. And as Brad Jackson briefs in his hydrologic presentations for this meeting, we're seeing benefits to that pump station being turned on. Well, the Corps finished plugging the rest of the canal. So when this rainy season rolled around, we got full restoration benefit of that area of the Faki Union Canal. And Brad will touch on that as an update in his hydrologic report, but it's great to have some restoration benefits while we wait for the project to come across the finish line. But the Corps assures me that it'll be done next year. So let's all get ready to celebrate, and I look forward to that day as well. The next discussion item is the Bird Rookery Boardwalk replacement, and Kathy Collins, welcome.
Good afternoon. As Ms. Roman said, I'm Kathy Collins, and I'm here to give you some good news on the Bird Rookery Swamp Boardwalk replacement. Get my bearings on the slides. Oh, did it right. Okay, so to start with, let's talk about where we're located. We're in the bottom area over here is where the boardwalk is located. It's part of the Bird Rookery Swamp. And it's the bigger area is the crew area. Again, here's the boardwalk, and it is 1,400 feet long, and it's part of a 12-mile walking trail. As you can see too, there are a lot of animals enjoying the boardwalk. We have panther, we have owls. About 6 months ago, Rory came to the board and explained the condition of the boardwalk. And you can see some of those pictures. After that, Lisa and Rory came to engineering and construction staff and asked for an engineering evaluation of the condition. And that evaluation came back saying that we needed to do a full replacement. The condition, this is a 20-year-old structure, and it's made out of wood. Here are some of the conditions that we have to consider when we're going to be building this. The first one is the condition of the soil. You have soft soil, so no heavy equipment, and we're going to put in special pilings, or recommending that, in metal as opposed to wood. Then we have the composite material that we're going to use, and if you don't mind, I have a sample I'd like to show you. And if we can put on the different colors.
Thank you. Thank you.
And as you have various colors that can be selected. That was
You'll have to be back on the mic.
As you can see, there are various colors that can be used for this composite material. Material has a 25-year manufacturer's warranty. And we're going to make sure that we try to work with a company that's well-known and will be there to back the product when we're going forward through the design. A few other things that we had to take into consideration is we want to minimize the time that the public's going to be impacted. Over 30,000 visitors a year come to this trail. And when we see the schedule, I'll show you how we're doing that. And there was also a study, the Corkscrew Water Initiative, to restore the area so that water elevation might change a bit. And to conclude, this is where we are today. We are now out for solicitations, and we are going to get those proposals on Monday. We're doing a design build process, so they're working hand in hand with the designer, the contractor, to come up with a project and that will work in the environment that we have. So we will be very interactive within the whole process. We plan to go with the design to governing board in November. The design we are anticipating to be complete in March of 25 and go back to governing board in April of 25 for construction. And we want construction to be finished about October 2025. The April through October is when the areas use the lease. It's during the summertime. Most people come and use the area during the fall and winter. And the project estimate at this time is $2 million. Anybody have any questions?
Okay, thank you very much, Kathy. We'll go ahead and see if there are any board comments or questions.
Oh, second after I finish the email.
Andy's going to have something here for you.
I know a little bit about composite companies. Trex is the industry leader with about 91% of their composite material is recycled material. AZEK is about 75%. I don't know if those two companies would be the supplier or that are bidding for this project.
The good point is by doing a design build concept, we, the district and Collier County and the Basin Board will be very much able to say, hey, we want this or we prefer this. We can look at the colors that are available. We can make recommendations for the type of material and who makes it.
Mhm.
So that would be greatly appreciated.
So the other factor too is the color and the heat factor too. Having dealt with composite materials, one would probably shy away from colors which absorb heat, especially in Florida. So that would be something else I would provide some advice to avoid that. And again, I think it'd be a great project for some of the leaders in this in the composite industry, which I just mentioned.
Yes,
So.
we appreciate that. And we'll be giving you updates as we go along and let you look at the materials we're doing, talk about the manufacturers we're using, as well as the colors. The material you saw, we recently did about 5 years ago, I think,
Okay.
out in Lanehart and Maston Dam. And we redid that and it's been holding up well.
So, yeah, I'm using the composite materials. It may be a little more expensive than wood, but we'll never have to worry about doing it again. And at least as far as people on the board, we'll be long gone before it comes around again as an issue.
Maybe.
Thank you.
You better not. Might be. Any other questions from the board? Any public comment, Troy?
No, ma'am.
Okay, I have a couple questions for you. You mentioned that the design is to use metal pilings. Potentially. And obviously the metal pilings, in the Florida heat, humidity and wet ground, they have to be made out of a certain material, right? So as to hold up over time.
Correct. And that's where we'll be having our engineers involved and the design engineers, as well as the contractors, all collaborating on what we've seen in the field that will work best in our environment. Probably might even look at the water quality, because that sometimes has impacts on the type of materials. High chlorides, and like, is it stainless steel, and what grade of stainless steel, or is it, there's the propellers they use on ships. That's another type of stainless steel mix, and it has to do with chlorides and others.
Yeah, that's good to know. And you mentioned April to October as far as the construction time frame, and that's good. Are you looking to include the thoughts to the contractors that they're going to have to be working during the rainy season so that their work schedule may not be as they design?
Yes, and a lot of times, and why we're going out with the design bid, is this is not a standard project that the district does, but we're going to the specialists, the marine contractors, people who do this, and let us tell us what is the best way to build this in the conditions we have.
I was just out there with the team out there at the whole 12-mile loop. I'd recommend it for the board members that want a nice hot day, especially in the summer. But I was really impressed with the discussion that we had about the current condition of the boardwalk, the use out there, and what this new boardwalk is going to add to the amenity, the recreational amenity out there. So I really appreciate this. It's going to be very important for our community.
Yes, it is beautiful out there when I went out and saw it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Okay, that brings us to our next discussion item, which will require a vote, and that is our fiscal year 2024-2025 budget presentation. And we have Candida Heater here today. Welcome, Candy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, board members. So today's presentation, as Madam Chair mentioned, will be requesting two votes, one on your millage rate for 24-25 and one on the budget. To start off, I just want to note that there are no changes from the presentation that was provided for your tentative budget and your approval from July to today's presentation. So starting off with the 2024-25 proposed millage rate, that rate proposal is 0.0978 mils. That translates to $9.78 per $100,000 of taxable value. A $500,000 home estimated amount would be $48.90 for the year. And listed on the slide are some examples of what that $48.90 contributes towards within the Basin Board's purview and activities. The budget before you today for 24-25 that will be available October 1 of 2024 is $22,006,945. You see that it is a balanced budget. Revenues equal the expenditures. On the revenue side, which is on the left-hand side, $14.3 million is estimated to be a result of the ad valorem tax revenue generated. And then a new funding source for the Collier County Cooperative Agreement, $2 million, is a new revenue source that is showing up in this year's 24-25 budget. On the expenditure side, a very healthy budget for flood control and your capital projects being the largest of the projected expenditures in 24-25. And then down on the right-hand corner, I had mentioned the $2 million of revenue, new revenue, that is offsetting and covering the expenditures for two new projects, Gordon River and Palm River structure replacements. So that's another highlight that's new in your 24-25 budget that was mentioned in July. So something a little different in this presentation is just highlighting those areas that contribute to working with your Basin staff members to accomplish your Basin work plan for 24-25. You have staff such as your general services staff that work under the administrative services and executive offices area that do provide maintenance activities for Lisa and her staff members. You also have the district headquarters water management oversight that works with Lisa's staff as well. And then, of course, the Basin members under Lisa's staff that are responsible for those activities listed on this slide. We also have engineering, construction, and modeling division of about $11.2 million that's responsible for working with the Basin staff to accomplish the suite of projects that are within your 5-year capital plan, of which those listed on the slide are the ones that we are planning to work towards in the 24-25 budget. We also had field operations and land management division, which includes Andrew's team that work at the field station and Rory's team for land management activities. We have infrastructure technology division that provides SCADA assistance and help, as well as you have a reserves for the Basin Board of $2 million. And then we have the property appraiser and tax collector fees and self-insurance that also make up that $2.4 million. It is a separate appropriation. That's why it is broken out separately. It has certain controls on it within our financial system to where these other expenditures that I have mentioned cannot, utilize these funds. To highlight, there are 2 additional opportunities for millage rate and budget discussions and public hearings for the public to attend, either in person or via Zoom. One being September 12th at 5:15, and then the second and final is September 24th at 5:15. So this brings us to the resolutions. Each resolution must be voted on separately. The first resolution to be voted on is the millage. The second resolution to be voted on is the budget. So starting with the first resolution, staff is requesting approval for BCBB 2024-0801 for the submittal of the millage rate 0.0978 mils for fiscal year 24-25, requesting the governing board of the South Florida Water Management District to levy ad valorem taxes within the Big Cypress Basin based on the rate to finance basin functions.
All right, we're going to take these resolutions one by one here. First of all, are there any board questions or comments for Ms. Heater? I don't see any. Candy, is there any public comment?
Not at this time, ma'am.
Okay, great. So what I'm going to do is ask for a motion and a second to approve resolution BCBB 2024-0801. Could I have a motion, please?
Motion.
Motion by Mr. Hill. Could I have a second, please?
I
Second.
so move.
Name for the second, please.
Oh, hey, it's Dan Waters.
Dan.
Okay, Vice Chair Waters seconds. Okay, I'm going to call roll call. Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Vice Chair Waters,
Yes.
Miss McLeod,
Yes.
Miss Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Romano,
Yes.
and I vote yes. That vote passes unanimously.
Thank you. The second and final request for approval is BCBB 2024-0802, submitting the fiscal year 24-2025 basin budget in the amount of $22,006,945 to the governing board of the South Florida Water Management District for inclusion in the district's budget.
Thank you, Candy. Are there any board questions or comments for Candy at this time? Then I'll go ahead and ask for a motion and a second to approve resolution BCBB 2024-0802. Could I have a motion, please?
Motion so moved.
Okay, Mr. Hill moves to approve. Can I have a second, please?
A second.
Name, please.
Michael Romano.
Okay, thank you, Mike. I couldn't quite make it out. Thank you so much. Okay, second
You're
by
welcome.
Mr. Romano. I'll go ahead and call a roll call vote. Mr. Hill,
Yes.
Vice Chair Waters,
Yes.
Ms. McLeod,
Yes.
Ms. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Romano,
Yes.
and I vote yes. That passes unanimously. Thank you very, very much, Ms. Heater, for your great work, and also for Julie for your super support to the basin. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And without good leadership, we couldn't be successful. So thank you. Thank you as a Basin board, and Lisa and her team as well.
Thank you so much. All right, that brings us to our first board comment. If there's any member of the board that has any comments to share with the group.
I have a couple things to share.
Okay, go ahead, Andy.
One positive thing, if you were watching the CBS Evening News last Sunday night, they had a report on the Python Challenge, which included footage of some of the South Florida Water Management District personnel. So I thought that was kind of neat to see some of our people being highlighted on the national news. Unfortunately, I wish the issue wasn't an issue. Second thing I'll just share with you that one of the benefits that we've seen in years ago when we raised 41 around Shark Valley to allow greater water flows, as a person that fishes that area, it is a huge difference in between the areas that benefit from that water flow in terms of the fish activity, the wildlife activity, versus 10 miles, 15 miles further north. It's incredible. I mean, it's no doubt a big difference. One of the unfortunate things, though, is I still see a significant amount of algae buildup. Usually it's near river mouths, on the oyster beds, on mangroves, and that is concerning. So I don't know what data we have to measure the amount of nitrogen and other potential contaminants in the water, but that is something that is concerning. It is pretty noticeable of that green muck, which I know doesn't belong there. So a couple of good and bad things that I see going on in my personal activities. So
Thank you so much, Mr. Hill. Vice Chair Waters, anything for the group?
No, nothing for me, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, great. Ms. McLeod?
No, ma'am, nothing for me. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Smith?
No, I think I'm fine too. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Romano?
Nothing from me. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Then we'll move on to our technical reports with the first report from our field station with Mr. Wolf.
Good afternoon. I'm here to give a field station operations report on our maintenance activities and our 3-month look ahead. We have a new piece of equipment that just came in since our last meeting. It's a new Caterpillar skid steer. This was originally budgeted for next year, but we had some savings on some projects and we could afford it this year. And it's also a $15,000 savings by purchasing it this year. So that'll be a welcome addition to our fleet. Our instructor inspection program, we're at 85%. And basically the only thing we have left is underwater repairs, which require contract divers. So we should be, if we stay on schedule and don't have any major rain events, we should be at 100% by October. Vegetation, seemed like after our heavy June rain, everything from the secondary canals was pushed into our canals and the vegetation has exploded. Here you see pictures from the I-75 canal. We have 2 of our conver boats in on the left side there. And the one on the right is at the structure, pulling the vegetation out. It's gotten so bad on I-75 that we had Miami bring in a towboat to help us out on I-75. And you see this boat is quite a bit larger and carries more vegetation than our conver boats. But it does take specialized equipment such as a lowboy and a crane to put it in and move it anywhere. So it has its advantages and disadvantages, but it's a welcome relief. It cleaned out I-75 very quickly. We removed over 100,000 pounds of vegetation from I-75 with these boats. Then here we have our long reach on Henderson Canal, and he's pulling vegetation out, putting it right in the dump truck so it can be hauled away. All during this vegetation and gate changes, we do preventive maintenance because we have to stay up with our preventive maintenance to our structures so they are ready in case of a storm event or a rain event. And we had quite a few gate changes before Tropical Storm Debbie, but it wasn't near as many as our rain event in June, just because in June, all our structures were set to dry season, where this before Debbie was everything. We had water, so they were set to release water. So it was a lot easier getting ready for the storm than it was the June rain event. Miami installed 2 temporary pumps at GG2. These are 12-inch intake, 8-inch discharge pumps. And here you see their high pressure discharge. And just as a side note, they did readjust the discharge so it didn't hit the handrail there after they got it started. But what's good about these is they don't need specialized equipment to move them, and they can be installed within an hour. So within 2 hours, they had both pumps operating at GG2. The Henderson Creek Tree Project is just wrapping up. I'll have a little more details and some before and after shots at our next meeting. But you see on the left, they come through and they take out the bulk of the trees, and then they'll come back through and cut the stumps flush and also clear up any excess vegetation. On the right is how they load the trees that they cut and take them downstream to unload and then haul away. It's turning out really good. You see on the left, we didn't have much right of way, but at least if any tree falls, it won't go into the canal. It should be caught on the bank. So it's a lot safer. And this is just north of Henderson Creek 1 structure. So it's a very important area. On July 2nd, the Naples Area Board of Realtors, which Ms. Smith is the president, organized a cleanup of the Henderson Canal and the Green Canal. The bulk of the people were on Henderson, as you see on the right-hand picture, picking up trash and debris. And on the left side was a crew that was in our pontoon boat that was in Green Canal, picking up debris. They picked up over 500 pounds of trash and debris, and it's a very welcome sight because Henderson has never looked so clean. We appreciate their volunteering for this. 2 weeks later, and the same area that the cleanup was, we found a 10-foot python on Henderson Creek. Luckily, none of the volunteers had any encounters with the snake. 3-month look ahead, continue our structure inspection program repairs, continue vegetation removal and washouts repairs, complete the automation of the 951 North structure, and respond to wet season gate changes. An update for the comprehensive Everglades restoration projects. The low flow pump at Merritt was removed, and in order to remove it, it's like removing one of the larger pumps. This is a 36-inch electric pump, and we have to dry out the bay, and the contractor came in and removed it, and that's at their shop right now getting repaired. Don't have a timeline yet on when it'll be back and installed, but there's other pumps there and one other low flow that take up the lack of this pump. At Merritt, or I'm sorry, at the low flow pump from Merritt, as you see on the left, the prop is in excellent condition, but the diffuser is going to need rebuilt on it. This pump has 16,000 hours, which is a lot for an electric pump. So it's done good, but as this lessons learned, we're going to pull the other one this dry season and inspect it and make sure it is up to doing another season. That one has 18,000 hours on it. So at Faka Union, we pulled the lube water intake pump. You see on the right there, contractors hauling it off to their shop. The shaft broke on it. Luckily, everything has a backup system at the pump station. So there's 2 other intake pumps that can be used. So this should be back in service very soon. Just as our operations, 24-hour operations, Merritt started 24 operations on June 14th. Paca Union went 10 days straight after Debbie. And Miller was actually pumped for 3 days after Tropical Storm Debbie. Miller, it was a good test run for it just because of the high water in Miller Canal. And so we can see if there's any issues going to come up when it does actually get the canal shut off and we'll have to use it permanently. Now, these 24-hour operations, there's personnel there for these 24 hours. So we've had someone at Merritt since June 14th, basically running the pump station. We had our contractor mulching underneath the power lines out at Picayune just to keep the vegetation clear in case there's a fire or anything. We don't want the power lines to have any impact and possibly lose power to our pump stations. And our 3-month look ahead, respond to wet season pump orders, replace the broken pump shaft and low flow at Merritt, repair the lube water pump, and continue training new employees. As of 2 weeks ago, we now have a full roster of employees at the pump station, which is excellent. This just means there would be some training coming up before they can actually operate by themselves, but that's good news. And every meeting, I come up with a hazardous animal that we encounter at the pump stations. There was an alligator in the fuel farm at Faca, a panther walking across Merritt, and a ferocious kitten that went into Miller. Well, this time we have some odd-looking deer walking across our levee out there. So we may have to put a cattle crossing sign up soon, but just a couple of strays that hang around the pump stations. Other than that, any questions?
Thank you very much, Andy. Are there any questions for Mr. Wolf?
Yes, the source of all the vegetation that was coming to the canal, that wasn't from the canal itself. Was that from neighboring areas that have run off into the canal system?
Partially both. There
Okay.
was some vegetation in the canals, but then after that heavy rain, everything got washed out of the secondary, canals into ours. So it's kind of a combination.
Oh, yeah.
Anything else? No.
No.
Ms. Smith, go ahead.
Andrew, I just want to publicly thank you for all the work that you did for our cleanup. And I'm so happy that python came a week later. It's not even funny. And I was going to ask the same question about the 100,000 ton of debris, but that makes sense. That's a lot given that we had 500 pounds. So big difference, but thank you very much. It was a great day. And we had I think we had 35 participants and hope to partner with you in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, it was a great event, and we appreciate your volunteers and organizing it.
Super. I don't see any other questions. Thank you so much, Andy.
Thank you.
Okay, water conditions report with Mr. Brad Jackson.
Oh, yeah, good afternoon, Madam Chair, board members. Like you said, Brad Jackson here to give you your water conditions report and update you on how the system's looking and how much rainfall, and go over a little bit of Tropical Storm Debbie that occurred. So as I usually start off here, I'll start off with our rainfall summary for our year to date. This is 2024. Probably remember from last month, we basically, story was we had above average rainfall pretty much since the wet season started. And that trend has continued. We've got the 3 months here, June, July, August have all been above average for us. And so far this year, we're running about 50 inches year to date across the basin, which is almost our complete annual amount of rainfall already. And we still have several months of wet season left and hurricane season left. So we're looking at about 13 inches over what we would normally see at this point. And the two things that mainly contributed to that is the storm in June, the Invest 90L, and then Tropical Storm Debbie, which I'll highlight some more a little bit later on. So to look back at July at the rainfall, I did say it was above average rainfall, but the thing I really want to highlight here is what's interesting is where that rainfall fell within the basin. And if you look at the middle of the system here on the right, you see these red colors that are in the Golden Gate, Maine. This is that I-75 corridor. And Henderson Creek corridor that Andrew just spoke about, where they did a bunch of vegetation removal. So not only was it had vegetation in it, it was also got extreme amounts of rainfall in July ahead of Tropical Storm Debbie. So if you look at the color of this area, you're looking not at 10 inches of rainfall, but that 17 to 20 inches of rainfall in those regions, which is about double what you would normally see in July. So this area, the important part here is how wet it was going into the event in August. So very stark contrast from the June event when the conditions ahead of the event were very, very dry. So I'll fast forward now to early August. This is Tropical Storm Debbie. And it was a 3-day event. It came to us. We watched it, like Lisa said, early on, more than a week ahead of time. We started making operations considering how wet everything was ahead of time. And really, but the pre-storm drawdown, where we started drawing things down below our permitted, the normal operational levels, we did that a week ahead of time. To really take advantage of the lead time we had going up to it and to make storage because of how wet it was preceding the actual event. So the rainfall started about August 3rd. The main rain day was the 4th, and then finished up on the 5th. That did end up making landfall around the Big Bend of Florida on the 5th as a Category 1 storm. And then to highlight kind of just what the system looked like, I picked one control structure out of the 34 that we have, and took some pictures, or the field station took some pictures of what the system looked like before before the storm came. So this is GG6 on the left and right. And so this is looking upstream from the structure. You can see the water line as it is before the storm, and you can see the normal water line here near the top of bank. You can see them on these pilings here. And there's several feet of storage there. You can see the same type of picture. This is a picture on the right. It's just turned around the other way looking at the structure. Normally the water's flowing over these concrete pieces. And in this case, before the storm, we wanted to lower it as much as possible. So it really shows you how much flexibility we have in operating the system, and all the tools that we have to really make room and prepare the community for these types of events. So how much rainfall actually happened? Like I said, it started on the 3rd, ended on the 5th. Overall, the heaviest rainfall was focused in the western part of our basin, basically from Picayune Strand to the west. But then over on average, we got about 5 inches if you look everywhere. But the thing that's interesting is, remember in July where I said the area got the heaviest amount of rainfall, the 17 inches. Well, that did not relent this time either, and that same area continued to get the higher amount of rainfall. And you're looking at maximum 8 inches in that area. So you're in the 6 to 8 inch on top of the already 17 inches of rainfall that got there. And so that really had a quick response to the area water level. So you had water in the canals, you had water on the roads that needed to get to the canal and get out. So you didn't have that groundwater storage available already for this. So I wanted to keep talking about a little bit of how this area got so much rainfall right on top of it. It's the same areas that kept getting more rainfall. And then just want to highlight that a little bit more. Henderson Creek, which is one of the areas that I just mentioned, it's received the 50 inches of rainfall, not since January 1st, but since May 1st. So that's 200% of what we already normally get. And that's almost 2 feet of rainfall just in the couple of months of the summer so far. And it's only got one outlet that it can go. It's got to go out the main canal. So, and Lisa mentioned this at the beginning of the meeting on the tropical storm, storm surge effects, and how important that is for us to consider when we're operating the system and the impact it has on how we do things. So I'm going to I haven't done a graph like this before, so I'm going to spend a little time talking about it. But the storm came up the west coast offshore, and so it pushed storm surge into the bays and elevated the tidal side of our structures, which hampers how much water we can move. And so what you see on the top of the screen here, this is the gauge down on 41 in Naples Bay. And so the blue line is that your normal tidal oscillations. And this is the day before the storm, during the storm, and then the few days after on the right here. The red line, that's the actual measured water level at that tidal station. You can see here in this middle area, that's when that peak rainfall hit. This is starting at midnight on the 4th through midnight on the 5th, as that's when we got the most amount of rainfall. Just like Lisa said, it coincided, the rainfall and the high tide came together. And so the thing that I really want to highlight here is the operational range of our coastal structure, which is upstream of this monitoring station, and where it likes to operate, where we need to operate it on a normal condition. I highlighted that with this blue band. So in a normal day-to-day, every other day, not a storm condition, the water levels at our control structure inside this green, this kind of blue area, in this condition, the tidal side of it is already at the very top of our range. So if you've got almost fighting forces there trying to release water from all the rain we had, plus the storm surge that's coming into us, and that really slows down. It's like a traffic jam. Everything kind of backs up, and you're still moving, but you're not moving as efficiently as we would like it to be. And the thing that's interesting here is the storm surge, even though it wasn't significant in its height, it had a longer duration. We didn't see a low tide again for another 48 hours after the storm came. And at that point, we could really start to ramp up operations and get the water out of the system rather than just being slowed down. So it took a little time to recover. But even though these high water levels at the normal top of existed at the top of the operational range, we still didn't exceed those by very much. So that shows the success of the pre-storm drawdown and how we were able to manage the system ahead of it and some of the emergency things that we've did throughout the system. And I'll highlight those a little bit later as well. Let me go back one here. And so on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see kind of visually, this isn't GG1, it's another structure, a coastal structure. But on the right, that's the tidal side. And you can see on the left is the freshwater side. And the water comes up and is everywhere. Normally the water is going through these gates and it's not all around it like it is here in this photograph. So it just shows you even this structure, it's not able to do everything it wants or should be doing because of the storm surge effects, not because of the lack of the gate being open, which you can see here is the case. The east gates are wide open. So with those challenges, like I already mentioned, we had the pre-storm saturated conditions, the 17 inches of rain in places ahead of it, the heavy rainfall and this long storm surge duration. How the system responded. It responded exceptionally well, just as we expected it to. The canals did exceed their normal operational levels, but that in places and not everywhere, but it didn't exceed anything that remained that really was a challenge for it. The water levels, while outside the normal ranges, still peaked well below storm levels that you would see in Irma or a similar type event. We were 2 feet lower than that compared to what we saw in Irma throughout the system. So it did exceptionally well. And even with that, remember, even though the levels peaked below what we saw in Irma, we still did the emergency pumping, that GG2. So like Andrew said, we deployed those 2 8-inch pumps at GG2. And since the structure was at capacity with how much water we could move it, that's what those pumps were to do, is the forward pump around the structure to help evacuate as much water as we could from that hardest hit area. That was that kind of I-75 corridor, Golden Gate, Maine. And we did the same thing with the Miller pump station, which it pulls water out another direction and sends it towards the Picayune Strand restoration. Not for restoration pumping, but for emergency use because it was a declared emergency for us. And we did that for a few days. So that it was all of a goal to move water out of that already stressed system as quickly as possible so water levels could recover and things could get back to normal, which ended up taking, I know high tide came, or the storm surge subsided a couple days, and then recovery happened a couple days after that. So it was a week after, like Lisa said at the beginning of the meeting. It's not a 1 day or 2 day event. It's a 2-week deal for us to deal with them. So now I'll back off the storm a little bit and then talk about Picayune Strand operations and what the restoration looks like today. And I'll walk through this slide here. Let's focus on the left first. The green polygon on the left, that's the current footprint of the restored area. It doesn't include the Miller because that canal is still open and flowing. But the amount of water we've pumped out of these 2 pump stations, Vaca Union and Merritt, is about 100,000 acre feet just since May 1st. And then if you couple that with the rainfall that we also got, which is 130,000 acre feet, if you boxed all that up around it, it's about 6.5 feet of depth of water. If you put it there all at once, obviously we don't do that. But that's to give you some visualization of how much water we're talking about here. Compare that to last year where we only pumped 40,000 acre feet. So we're more than 2.5 times what we pumped last year already.
Great.
And so the middle picture here, this is early June And on the right is early August. And I'll explain what you see here. I've got the pump stations labeled again here with the triangles. But on the middle slide here, on the middle picture, that's just indicating that dark red is that water levels are below ground by more than 2.5 feet. So there's no sheet flow at that point in time, because we're just exiting dry season, and the water levels haven't come up yet. If you fast forward to August, you see these greens and yellows and blues. And if you can follow the kind of green path coming out of Merritt Pump Station and now the Fact Union Pump Station, those are the deepest areas of water coming out of the spreader basins. And now this kind of sheet flow is now restored that you can see. And the new area that was just plugged this last spring, you can see it is now have 1-2 feet of water on top of the whole thing, not just in little low-lying areas, but you can see the whole sheet of water going down there. So this is a neat way to visually see that, the actual restoration happening in progress. So I will close here with an outlook on where we are in hurricane season. We just had Tropical Storm Debbie, but we still have the main peak of the season left in front of us here in a few weeks. And then really we're going to have a lot of that season left. So we've got already a surplus of water in the system that we're, in flood control operations with, but we're going to keep our eyes out for the tropics and make sure that we're able to respond to anything that's coming our way. And even the routine rainfall events that we see daily in this area are expected to probably have an above average chance of more rainfall for the rest of the wet season looking forward. So we're ready to deal with that as we always are. So I will close there and happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Brad, for your excellent report. Are there any questions for Brad?
Brad, on the going back to the Picayune Strand, 2 questions. First, you highlight in the slide doesn't show anything below or on the west side of 41. Is that just the way your slide works, or?
We just had to draw the boundary some way for that particular.
Okay, so then that outside of that, we have there's no value in looking at that.
I mean, some of that, as it becomes more marshy, it's more tidally influenced, and you already have kind of the water.
That's what I was wondering about. It was whether we could learn anything from a slide that would include both sides of 41. Okay. Big question, which maybe some of the people in this room could be able to answer, is what is the benefit, I hope it is, of the increased water, rainfall that we've had this year that is now flushing through the whole ecosystem, the estuaries. I'm hoping that's a good thing.
I mean, the system, Mother Nature gives us floods, it gives us droughts, it needs both to thrive. I'm not an ecologist, so I won't get into all that. I just know it needs a balance of both things. So I can leave it there, but someone might be able to look at that a little bit more as far as we don't want this type of thing every year after year.
Mhm.
So as long as there's, a little give and take, we have normal years, average years, and below average, they all kind of are good for the environment. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other questions. Brad, thank you so much for your presentation.
Madam Chair, excuse me, Mr. Dan Waters' hand just went up.
Okay, great. Vice Chair Waters, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Just quick kind of thought to Andy's question. The one thing that jumps out at me with when we look at Brad's slide showing the depth of water that we've got in the restoration areas in the Picayune, sort of, the thing that jumps out to me is we've had all this extra rain and we can't control how much rain or how much water comes down there. It's a function of how much rain we get. We've got no control over that. But with the plugging of the canals and the pump stations and the ability to store that on the land, we end up just doing a lot of improvement for things like we saw last month or last meeting with the oyster beds and how much harm those see when we get too much water too fast there. And so I think it's kudos to everybody that's been involved in that. And it's great to see, the things that we have done and people have worked on for years and years are coming to fruition. And we're going to start to see benefits in the estuary downstream as a result of that.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other hands raised, so go ahead, Brad. Thank you. All right, for our monthly financial report, Ms. Heater.
Thank you, Madam Chair, board members. The monthly financial report that is in your package and for discussion today is through the month of June. So the good news is that you've fully collected all of your ad valorem taxes. So all of your recurring funding that we had projected for ad valorem taxes has been collected through the month of June. So you're at 100.3%. You collected $39,341 additional. So moving on to the expenditures, you have thus far spent $5.7 million. There is $4 million of obligations for contracts, and then there's 11 million still available through the month of June. A lot of that money now is tied up because of the or will be tied up because of the tower project, and then some seed funds, seed money to get the boardwalk started. And that also includes $2 million of your reserves, which we hope to not spend. And then the rest of the remaining July, August, September dollars to cover staff time, Andrew's operations, etc. So right now, the Basin board looks very healthy financially. We collected all of our revenue, and we're doing well with our expenditures and obligations.
Thank you so much. Are there any board member questions for Ms. Heater? I don't see any. Is there any public comment, Troy?
No, ma'am.
Thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Thank you. All right, that brings us to our last public comment session. Troy, is there any public comment?
We have no one.
Okay, then that's our final board comment coming next, and that will start with Mr. Hill.
I have no comment.
Okay, Vice Chair Waters.
Nothing for me. Look forward to seeing everybody in person in October. Thank you.
Ms. McLeod.
Yeah, just great job, PJ, with that cleanup initiative. Sounds like it was well organized and well executed. So great job.
Ms. Smith.
Thank you, Michelle. And it was super fun. I just want to thank you for allowing us to Zoom on to this meeting because of unexpected travel. So thank you, and great information today.
Mr. Romano.
No comment, but I want to say thank you very much.
Thank you. And I really want to thank you, Ms. Smith, for the great work on the volunteer event. Looks like a lot of fun, and I'm not so sure the next time, if you do it next time, if there is a Python, we couldn't turn that into an educational opportunity. That would be great. I just want to thank everyone for just a tremendous job that you've done with this meeting, particularly the district and Basin team and IT and Troy, Mark. I just want to say thank you. Many folks don't know, but we're coming, some of the board members are coming to this meeting and participating internationally, nationally, and board members in the room. So today's meeting was seamless, and I just really appreciate how well all of the professionals, all of you, worked behind the scenes to make it go smoothly. So thank you very much for that. And I'd like to thank everyone who participated in today's meeting. Our next Basin Board meeting is scheduled for Friday, October 25th, right here at 11 a.m. And with that, we're adjourned.